I'm Christine Hastrup. I'm the current director of the Archaeological Research Facility, who likes to host these every year, every other year with the PRM companies, and the other year are with agencies who are your cousins, who you probably know from forestry or Caltrans or whatever. And I'm sure there's lots of interaction between you two. We alternate the two. And we're just really grateful and happy that you're all here from your companies. And I'm sure you'll all say something about these as we move through your own information. But the host of today actually is going to be Professor Bill White, who is engaged in this, teaches classes linked to, in fact, what you do and the rules and legalities around that and the ethics of codes of ethics. So I'm going to turn over the podium, if you will, to Bill White, Professor White, right. And he's going to host and introduce each of you, or at least allow you each to introduce yourself. So welcome, and I hope you learn a lot and enjoy this. And then afterwards, right out here, you can see it's sort of open to this room. We'll have some little nibbles, food and drink, so you can meet one-on-one, get to know each other, get to know the people here. So feel free to stick around and chat. So thank you very much for coming and arriving on time and driving however far you had to drive. So really great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, actually, this is one of my favorite things that I do at this job. I really love this panel. It's something that I absolutely wish they had when I was a student. So rather than going down the list of everyone, I like for people to introduce themselves, what their position is, and then we can move into the questions. I only have a couple of questions because I really want the audience to be the one who asks the questions. So do you want to sort it out, or should we go left to right?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, excellent. Please, my friend.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Doug Ross, and I'm a senior archaeologist at Albion Environmental. I'm based out of Santa Cruz, but we also have an office in San Luis Obispo. And I am a project manager, PI, etc., specializing in historical archaeology.
All right. Please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alex. I'm with Alta Archaeological Consulting. We're a small mom and pop shop in Santa Rosa, and I'm one of the owners. I own it along with my wife.
My name is Montse Osterlye. I'm a senior archaeologist at Far Western Anthropological Research Group. Our main office is in Davis, but we also, I work out of Sausalito, and we have two offices in Nevada. I'm a senior historical archaeologist, so I'm not an owner, but here representing Far Western.
My name is Samantha Schell. I'm with Pacific Legacy. I'm a principal and owner, and I'm an osteologist and an alumnus of UC Berkeley. So go Bears.
My name is Dan Shoup. I'm the principal of and co-owner of Archaeological-Historical Consultants. We're a small firm based in Oakland, and we do, I do a little of everything. Management, archaeology, architectural history.
Okay, great. So I think folks can see there's a wide range of guests here. Thank you very much for coming. My first question, so most of the folks here are students. We don't have to go in order or whatever, but if you'd be willing to share about your experiences as a student and what did you learn in college that actually really helped you in your career?
I'll go with that. So as you'll probably figure out after I've spoken a little bit, I'm actually from Canada originally. So I'm going to say the trigger words that everyone, the oot and a boot type things. But anyway, I think if I kind of looking back from where I am right now in CRM, I think as an undergraduate, I was able to take a summer internship in Ontario in Canada. The government agency regulating CRM archaeology in the province offered a summer internship every year. And I was able to do one of those. And basically what they did is they farmed you out to a half dozen CRM companies for like a week. And you would shadow their, whether it was typically in the field, but sometimes in the lab. So you'd shadow that company for a week. And we drove all over Southern Ontario, shadowing different companies doing stuff. So that was kind of, I think, like a really formative early experience that kind of gave me some insight into how the consulting industry works. And as a graduate student at William and Mary in Virginia, I was also able to do a summer CRM internship. Because William and Mary has an in-house CRM firm on campus, a fairly well-known one. And so we interned with them for a year. So we basically worked on actual CRM projects for a summer. So I felt like I was luckier than most in that by the time I eventually made it into CRM as a full-time professional, I kind of knew what was, what I was up, in for, I guess, and had a bit of background. So even though there's differences between Canada and the US, and even between different US states, kind of the core stuff's the same. So those are kind of a couple of examples.
So then the internships were the critical.
Yeah, the internships. I mean, definitely, the academic stuff is important too, because you learn how to research and write. And do like things like photography and lab analysis, which I do constantly in my job. And so it's not just the CRM. I don't want to just say that it's just the CRM courses and internships. The academic stuff's critical. Like if I couldn't write, and if I wasn't an expert in historic artifact analysis, I wouldn't be able to do my job either. So it's a bit of both.
Great. Want to mix it up?
Yeah, I'll go because I had a bit of a different path. I didn't go to college out of high school. I went to work and I ended up working at Capitol Hill and in Washington DC for a member of Congress and decided that I needed to come back to California and went to a junior college and then transferred into UC Berkeley. And so I do feel like having real life work experience was super useful for me. I studied paleoanthropology. I did study archaeology here. I did do a field school through UC Berkeley, which was the game changer. That was the thing that kicked open the doors for me in terms of archaeology. And then I got a job at Sonoma State University working on a huge project and got an enormous amount of training and got to work with a lot of specialists and experts who shared their knowledge. And that was really huge for me. So I do feel like there are lots of different paths. You may not have taken a traditional path, but there are lots of opportunities nonetheless.
Yes, please.
A couple, I mean, to talk about actual like coursework that was, you might not have considered, but was actually really helpful, is I took class.
Student, so I'm also a Cal alum. I was only here for 2 years, and so I didn't have a ton of time to really figure out how to get into CRM. I knew I wanted to, and at that time, I graduated in 2013. I was sending out resumes all the time. It was really hard to even hear back from anybody, and I would say that's very different now. So if I were a student now, knowing what I do working in CRM, I would say, send out your resumes now to firms, get summer work. Because you can learn the material culture, obviously, and the sort of overview of the discipline and the history of, California archaeology. But CRM is a pretty niche field. So if you can get that hands-on work experience, also just to feel out if it's for you, on top of a field school, that would be my advice. Yeah, we need people. I can speak for everybody, so it's a good time to do that.
Bill, your question was?
My question was, because there's students in the room, tell us about your college experience and what you learned in college. How did it help you later on?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have to say that I've never really known where I was going, but, and then you look back and somehow you got where you are, you know, and I'm in this position now where I'm a principal investigator and a technical resource, and I'm advising people on kind of high-end stuff, and it's like, man, my journey was crazy, because I started off in the fine arts track, right? So I'm in college thinking I'm pretty good at art or whatever, and I just had this moment where it's like, man, this is not my path. And I was at Cabrillo College taking general ed classes, and I took a California Indians class from Chuck Smith, who was a wonderful teacher. And that kind of opened me into this door of anthropology that I wasn't even on my radar before. And then I took some field methods classes in archaeology from Rob Edwards, who's a great teacher down there in the community schools. And somehow in my, youthful mind, I thought, fine arts isn't a practical path. Go into archaeology, right? To my parents, they're like, "You're crazy," and it worked out. But just kind of encountering things in school and that matched me, and I found my group of people, and I look back and it's been 25 years of that, just kind of like finding my way. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Those are all great stories.
Well, and we're all doing it, right? So you actually can become an archaeologist and make a career of it, however you get there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm glad you led into that, because I was gonna ask, how did you get there? That was the next quest, right? So everybody knows how they got to college, that's how they're all here. The next question is, how do they get over here? How do they make a career in archaeology? Any suggestions?
Well, to piggyback on what Montse said about sending out your resumes, definitely do that. And if you don't hear back from people, it's not personal. We all wear many, many hats in our firms, and we're all, we're running the business, we're running projects, we're doing staffing, we're doing planning, and it's hard to, respond quickly. And if you don't hear back immediately about a project, that's because project schedules are nuts. They start, they stop, they start, they stop. So I would say, I tell people all the time when I'm doing sort of informational interviews, call back, email again, because things happen quickly. And when your email's at the top of the list and you go, oh yeah, I need crew. And so it's not, and don't feel like you're in imposition. And if anybody makes you feel like you're in imposition, then don't email that firm again. You email the ones that are, working with you, because we all understand what it is to start out and to be a technician and to be learning through projects. And also, if you haven't heard about this already, all these firms keep on-call lists of technicians, and we all share the same people. So it's not unusual for you to be on on-call tech with multiple firms, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely part of the business. And it's a good way for you to check out different companies and see what company culture fits you best too, and to see the kind of projects that they're doing that interest you, and if they have people that you feel like you're gelling with.
Any other advice?
Well, and in terms of how we ended up where we are, is that what that was the question? So I am a failed academic. I am an archaeologist that got my PhD with dreams of being a tenured faculty member somewhere. And I completed the PhD, and I did adjunct teaching for 7 years in Canada. And after those 7 years of pain and suffering, of low wages, no benefits, unpredictable teaching assignments, I decided I needed to do something else with my life. I applied to a bunch of academic jobs. In a couple cases, almost got there, but not quite. And then decided after those 7 years of giving it a shot, I'm going to go for something else. And so I cold called some companies in California, and I just happened to get a hit right off the bat. In fact, I ended up with the first company that got back to me. Speaking of people reaching out to you and goodness of fit and feeling the vibes and stuff. So I went through that whole process of grieving the loss of my academic career, and but almost 10 years on, I'm very happy in my career. I get to do, I do the drudgery that everybody does in CRM, but I also get to do cool research stuff. Like I just published an article like last month, based on one of the projects I did with Albion. So yeah, I mean, you can combine CRM with research interests. You don't have to give up one thing to have the other. I think, which is kind of a key thing,
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.
I had a kind of, I don't know if it's an unusual path, but I didn't have any major when I transferred here. And then quickly selected anthropology and was trying to figure out, can I do anything with this? And, asked a lot of the professors I had for their advice, grad students, just looking from different sources, just anybody who could tell me anything. And I ended up applying and getting an internship at the Presidio Trust in San Francisco as an archaeology intern, which I'm really grateful for. And then after that ended, I worked for the Forest Service as an archaeology technician for 1 season. And at that point, I had already made enough connections that I kind of knew who to contact at different firms and was able to get into private consulting that way. And yeah, I think, again, it was just really trying to identify, my niche and, what my interests were and how I could apply them in this industry. And, for me, that was historical archaeology. And yeah, just really kind of pounding the pavement, and so to speak, to just, go to conferences and just meet people and make those connections. I think that was really ultimately what I ended up doing to get where I am now.
It's great advice too. You mentioned a little while ago the on-call position. Can you please explain to folks what on-call means?
Sure. So you would send your resume to our company, we'd do an interview, kind of get a sense for what experience you have. And then would place you on what's called an on-call list, and this is what everybody has. So we would determine like what your level is of your technician level, what your rate is. And then when we have projects, we would call you and say, all right, we've got a project coming up in the next 2 weeks, and it's gonna be in this location, and you meet the qualifications for this particular client. Are you available to come? And it's a 1-week project. Maybe it's a 10-day rotation, maybe it's a 3-day project, but that's it. You're there as a technician, you're either gonna come and be a surveyor, or is typically what you do, at least for our firm, we will pair folks like you who are starting out with somebody who's seasoned and experienced, so that you know what you're looking for, so you know what you're seeing, because if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know if you just walked over it. And so that on-call is called, it's sort of like, it's a seasonal employee. And so a lot of folks will sign up with all these firms, get on all their on-call lists, and sort of patchwork together a schedule when they're available, like during summer for you guys. Or if you know that you're gonna be around during breaks, you can let folks know that you'll be around during that time too. And it's a lot of work, in my opinion. It sounds like a lot of work to do that, but it is a great way to get a lot of experience with different people.
Right, so you'd be a part-time rather than a full-time employee for each of these firms that you would work with.
I don't even think you're part-time. I mean, you're a seasonal employee, you're a project-based employee. So when that project is over, it's over. But actually going back to the question that I didn't actually answer. I started out as a technician, and you get on projects and you work your butt off, and you make yourself really flexible and available to do stuff, so that you get asked back again, because you're enthusiastic, you take good notes, you do everything that your supervisor told you to do, assuming that it falls within what you're supposed to, which is appropriate. You learn a lot, and you build those relationships, and just jump from project to project until you find some place that you can land, or you end up going on to something else. Yeah, and what I did was I worked as a tech, actually, and unlike you, I ended up working for the same place. I did a couple of stints with other firms, sort of as a technician, but I always came back to Pacific Legacy. I got hired by the company that it was before it became Pacific Legacy. I can go back to Biosystems days. which was probably before all you guys were born.
That was the precursor of Albion as well.
And
Yeah,
Civic Legacy.
that's right.
Yeah.
So there's a.
One group to rule them all, right?
Yeah.
The primordial origins.
I would add too that, not that I ever went that route, but the thing that I see as really valuable in working for a variety of different firms as a tech, at least for a year or two, just while you're kind of getting your foot in the door, is that also gives you a lot more variety of experience, because different firms will have, different, large scale contracts with a certain kind of client, with certain type of regulations, so that you can really get that variety of experience in terms of just the actual like regulatory part of things, which I think is really the hardest part when you're starting out, is wrapping your head around that. I mean, I'm no expert at this point. I've come a long way, but if I had been able to sort of, and working for the feds before I came into private consulting definitely helped. But then you can kind of get a better sense of, the breadth of work that we do in CRM for different clients and at different levels.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we kind of came at it from different directions. Some of you guys worked your way up, from the kind of the tech pool, whereas I went through the academic route and I joined CRM as like a senior archaeologist. I didn't work my way up through through the trenches, through the tech pool. I started off wanting to be an academic, and then I came in kind of at a higher level because I had like 25 years of experience by the time I joined CRM. So you can come at it from different directions, and there's no one way to get, where we are.
Yeah, found yourself in the trenches anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe, I'll ask a couple more questions, but maybe you can give examples of what a day in the life of, entry-level person or someone who's been there for a while. Like, what's it like in the beginning? What's it like 5 years in?
I'll try that one, because I dream about the days when I was entry level. It's like, yeah, so just this week we've got a crew, and they're doing a large scale land survey. So there's 12 of us out there, and it's a 6,000 plus acre survey of rural land around Mount Shasta. So we get up, yeah, man, killer. Get up early in the morning. You got a crew of people, like-minded people. Strap on your backpacks. You got your lunch. You got your rain jacket. Let's go. Hike up a mountain, 800 feet in vertical, your legs are grinding, you get this crazy view of Castle Crags, right? And then you go down the other side through the White Pine, which is not a lot of fun. And then you'll find a bunch of trash from the 1950s. Sweet, we have an archaeological site. Right? And then you're recording cans and mapping stuff in GIS and taking photographs, and then you go home and take a shower and have a beer. That's the tech level thing that you guys will be signing up for when you start out. Super fun. My day starts off with answering about 40 emails, and then I'll have some spreadsheets and an awkward conversation with either a client or a staff person about something that needs to be fixed. And it's just like at that level, it's not as illustrious and beautiful as like the field dream of archaeology is so beautiful. Finding stuff, making beautiful maps. So at my level, it's a lot more bureaucracy than is in my heart to do, but I'm good at it. So yeah.
Yes, please.
I could give you an example from like a couple employees we have. So we have a relatively new hire who's been working for us about 3 or 4 months. She has been monitoring a construction project in San Jose, which happens to be right next to a good size burial ground near Coyote Creek. San Jose is building a bunch of emergency interim housing to get homeless people off the streets. So she spent 2 or 3 months watching trenches being excavated and finding nothing. She also came out and did some geoprobe work with us over on San Pablo Avenue in Berkeley this week. So that's what her day's been like. Pretty much field work. I've got her writing up some soil profiles and stuff from these projects. We have another employee who's been with us about 4 years, and she is managing projects on her own at this point. And those mostly look like archaeological sensitivity assessments, i.e. desk research. for looking at the sensitivity for geoarchaeology or historical archaeology in a given project location. Plus some projects that involve surveys, or, archaeological testing. But she's at the point where she's running the record searches, doing the Native American consultation, doing background research, and then putting together reports, sometimes with the assistance of more junior folks, sometimes with the assistance of me. My day also, much like Alex's, looks like a lot of emails, and like this morning I finished up 3 reports where like they wanted 2 sentences changed here or an additional thing here, just really minor edits, but it takes you 3-4 hours to just get that off your desk. And then a lot of time spent managing the stack of like stuff that I was supposed to do last week, and like, when is it gonna happen? It's not gonna happen this week either, so when am I gonna get to it? So prioritizing, delegating, and client communications, I guess you could say, is a lot of my day.
A lot of my day, it's a little bit of email, but I'm not, as high level as these folks. So kind of at my level, sort of, I don't know, midway between an owner and a tech. It's in my mind a really nice mix. I have to do the ticky-tacky at the laptop, but then like Wednesday I was cold calling property owners to do a pedestrian survey for a PG&E line, and when I was gonna have to go on their property in a really rural area where people hate PG&E. So trying to butter those people up to let them know, I'm just gonna be walking through for a second. If you don't want me to, let me know. So I had a bunch of phone calls like that. Yesterday, did the survey with a field tech, and didn't get any dog attacks or anything like that. It's relatively, yeah. Got to see, a beautiful area that I wouldn't go to for any other reason, wouldn't even have access to. And then I got back to my desk. I did some map research on a couple things that I found in the field that we recorded to see, do some archival research to see, is this 50 years or older? Should we document it as a cultural resource? And then doing some mapping to basically report out those results. So once you gain a little bit more experience and you're interested in sort of like the longer process, you can kind of be a part of every piece of that. I can't speak to going any more experienced than that. But I think that you can still kind of, if you find the right path, you can still have a balance of the emails and the bureaucracy and the beautiful views and finding stuff. You just don't make as much money, probably.
Discovery money.
Yeah.
So I know that many companies are looking for folks. What are you looking for, and what are you looking for in your new hires and folks that you're bringing on? What skills are you kind of trying to hire for, and then what kind of like abilities and characteristics of the people who are successful?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I think we're looking for people at kind of multiple levels. So we're looking for people for the tech pool, which we kind of already discussed. But we're also looking for someone with kind of like advanced GIS skills who could do archaeology field work and lab work and reporting, but could also do more complicated GIS, map work and that kind of thing. But we're also looking for people kind of at the higher levels, with like a bachelor's or graduate degree to be a field director, someone who's confident directing other employees in the field and basically running the field project under the supervision of a PI like me. And then we're even potentially looking for more project managers and PIs. So I think I think there's room for, people to reach out to us at kind of all levels. Not just kind of and depending on your experience and background and stuff, but I think kind of the key skill sets, we really like people that already have a field school under their belt. This is almost a baseline of skills that we'd like people to have. I mean, sometimes we consider people who have commensurate experience in other ways, but to some degree, we do our best to train people on the job, but we like them to come in with a certain base level of experience. And the field school is kind of a foundational training experience that we hope most people would have before we would consider bringing them on full time. And then beyond that, good communication skills, good writing skills. If you've developed some kind of burgeoning specialization in a lab skill, that would be really great. Really being, especially I think like a lot of us are like small, mid-sized companies, and all of our employees wear multiple hats and do tons of different jobs. So the more versatile you can be, the better. Like if the survey that's scheduled for tomorrow suddenly gets canceled for a month, we have to redistribute people amongst, different projects and different tasks. And so if you've got a bunch of different skills, you can pivot easily from a field survey to a day of helping someone write a proposal or working on lab analysis. And so I think being versatile as possible, but being a good communicator and a good writer would get you beyond the kind of the field tech stage, I think, in my mind. And having that field school under your belt would be, I think, probably job number one, I think, for us.
So I'm gonna differ with you about the writing is not gonna get you beyond being a field tech. Experience is gonna get you beyond being a field tech, because we're not, if you haven't been in the field and you don't, unless you can do like the background, but there's very small pieces of background sections or reports that you're really qualified to work on. So you've really got to get some hands-on experience, and like what you were describing in terms of the kinds of tasks that new people are doing are, small pieces of reports, which is in the office. And then the kinds of things that Alex was talking about, going out in the field and getting that actual survey experience and so forth. But we're looking for people who have field schools, and it is a requirement. We work with Caltrans, and
That's right.
Caltrans has very specific thresholds that you have to have had 6 weeks of experience. You have to have a field school, you have to have excavation, survey experience before we can even get you on the contract. So we hire techs all the time, and then we try to poke them around in places that are not Caltrans so that we can get you on one of our 2 Caltrans on calls, because you're not qualified currently to do that. But you can be, doesn't take very much time. You can be, but we got to get you that experience first. So you have the field school, California history. It's really important to understand. We get a lot of people who were applying for jobs outside of California, and I send them back resources. You have to understand California history. You have to understand the California counties. All of our sites are named by county. We work by county. So be sure you understand the counties in California. You should have some archaeological methods under your belt. You should certainly know how to write. A lot of people think they do.
Hardly anybody actually does.
But they don't, and I agree the specialties are it's good to get a specialty, but you should also be as versatile as possible. There was a period when we were all younger where people were like specialize. If you don't have a specialty, you're not doing anything, and that's nonsense, because the people who came with one ability weren't able to sort of fill in those gaps that he was talking about, because we do stuff gets canceled all the time, and you kind of have to move the pieces around to get people some experience. And then I would say this, as you are building your resume, you keep track for yourself. Start building your CV as soon as you start getting any experience at all. Track the amount of time that you worked on a project. You want the county, you want the regulatory compliance, you want the name of the project, and what your role was. So if you were a field technician, you're a field technician. If you become a crew chief, you want to record that, because as you grow your career, if you're going to be listed as a crew chief or a field director on a permit, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have a certain number of hours or weeks or days of experience, depending upon who the permitting agency is, to get on that permit as a higher level. So keep track for yourself. Because when you're out there, you're like, oh, that was groovy. And you go back to your hotel room, and you're like, where was I even today? Because you're tired. So you have to really track that for yourself, and it's going to pay off for you when you're trying to move around and get other experiences.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, either of you, but I just wanted to add a few things. Based on the experience we've had with people we've hired or tried to hire lately, and the skills gaps that they had. So it would be, I think it would be really helpful if you knew how to use them on Cellbook, some basic geoarchaeology soil description techniques. You should have at least seen or familiar with what prehistoric artifacts look like. We hired briefly a historic archaeologist who did all Louisiana historic plantation archaeology. She had never worked with lithics ever. So it just wasn't, clearly wasn't going to work out. That sort of came out with time. You should know how to read maps. Whether you love the public land survey system or not in the United States, and those of us who know the history of it understand it's all part of the colonialist trajectory, but it is the way that land is organized, and it's being able to read topographic maps, aerial photographs, and site plans and construction plans, which is very esoteric, is very important to what we do in terms of understanding the relationship between the proposed project and our assessment of its archaeological sensitivity. You should have some exposure to CEQA and Section 106, even if it's just limited to reading the stuff on the Office of Historic Preservation's website. It's very helpful to just read those and have some sense of like why we're doing what we're doing. There's legal and regulatory reasons for it. Now, getting into the details of that is like, multiple lifetimes potentially, because there's so many different agencies and they all do things differently. But at least understanding the framework is very helpful. And then finally, just like billable hours is the thing that we live or die by. So usually you'll be out, especially if you get to doing any office work, you're going to be allocated a certain amount of time to do a certain task. And it's really important to be transparent and proactive with your supervisor about if they say, hey, here, you have 2 hours to get this done. And you're like, I'm a little lost. Can you help? Like ask for help or say, hey, this doesn't seem like enough time for me. Can I have some more hours for this? Like we have to track, as managers, we have to track hours really carefully because that's how we make money. So it really helps. And I love it when junior employees are like, hey, it took me this long. You gave me too many hours. You didn't give me enough hours. I need more time. I don't understand this, or you're crazy for thinking that I can do this in 2 hours. That type of thing. Like, and this is where it helps, like you said, to have had a job outside of academia, where you're accountable for showing up somewhere, getting something done in a particular amount of time. So not to say you should, leave your careers for Starbucks before you come to CRM, but it helps to have that. I think some academics just are like, especially in the PhD world, you're like, okay, write a chapter, talk to me in 3 months. If you're like, kind of on loose ends and don't have to manage your time day to day in the way that you do in this field.
I could give some advice about, so say the situation, you wrote a resume and it was good enough to get hired, and now you're a part-time as-needed archaeologist. And you're on these projects. This just happened this week where I went to a project because we had a lot of new folks out there. I want to make sure everything was going well, but also I wanted to meet people. So after the interview and you're on the job, what I'm looking for is enthusiasm, responsibility. Don't show up late and don't show up. If we say if this is not Berkeley, if we say the truck leaves at 8 o'clock and you arrive at 8:10 and 10 of us stood around for 10 minutes waiting for you, we just wasted 100 minutes. Okay, we just wasted almost 2 hours of our time. So punctuality is a real thing. Like from a consultant's perspective, we are trying to do archaeology at the most efficient level possible. Because all of us up here also have a moral obligation to do good archaeology, right? But we're doing it in this situation where it's a contract archaeology. So time is money, right? It has to be well done. It has to be on budget. As soon as this stuff goes into the red, it's like, this can't perpetuate, So I'm looking for people, it's like, today's job is hike up that hill and it's going to be really hard. And, I want to see if they can do it. I want to see if they complain about it. Maybe this isn't the right fit. So, I'm looking for enthusiasm, responsibility, nice people to work with, some more than the paycheck. It's like, I got in archaeology because I found it fascinating. And it was like, this is a good match for me. It's outdoors, all this stuff I like. I'm looking for those people that are actually into their own job, right? This is potentially something they want to do, right? I'm going to invest in those people,
Mhm.
I got one last question before I turn it over, because there's instructors and graduate students here. What can higher education do to prepare people to work for your companies? What can we teach? What can we do?
That course that you're teaching here on CRM.
Wait a minute, you weren't supposed to say that.
I'm sorry.
Well,
Yeah, back to what Dan said, the regulatory compliance.
Yep.
That's really important because it does drive what we do.
Well, I get a lot of questions from kind of, junior and mid-level people saying, why are we doing this? They don't understand, why we're going out there doing that. And if they, and if folks had a little bit of understanding of the processes underlying why we're doing things in a certain way too. A lot of things that we do don't make sense unless you understand the regulatory process that requires us to, and all the starts and stops. There's a reason behind all the chaos in what we do. And so having an understanding of that regulatory environment, yeah, great.
California prehistory would be a good one to know.
Yeah.
Like, when did the bow and arrow show up in California? You should probably know that. It's a major technological innovation that changed the landscape, right?
I would also say that for some key historic, as a historical
Yeah.
archaeologist, taking a course in lab methods where you learn to identify some basic material culture, pre-colonial, historic material culture.
Material culture.
Like when were machine-made bottles introduced? When did pull tab beer cans appear? I know it's all alcohol related examples, but there's some like key stuff you see on the ground type knowledge that everyone should have a base level of, because even though it's your supervisor who's probably writing this up, being able to reach out to your supervisor from the field and explain what you're seeing to them so that they can make a call from their office. Is this something that's potentially important? Well, if you can tell them some key attributes of the objects that can tell you how old it is, then your supervisor, who may not be able to be out in the field with you, can say, oh, that's potentially older than 50 years, or, that's this, that, and the other thing, and so having a base level of knowledge, even if you don't have to make the big decisions, helps the people that do need to make those big decisions make them, I guess.
So geology and land formation is really something that a lot of archaeologists that undergrads come out of with the anthropology, archaeology degree, not really having experience or exposure to. And it's so important because when you are working in an area that's in Mendocino County, for example, there's a lot of tectonic activity. The soils are moving and shifting all the time. So if you're doing a pedestrian survey is when you're literally walking on the ground, you may not necessarily you're not looking on the ground and seeing anything that happened more recently than 10 years ago. So you have to shift your mentality in terms of what you're looking for in your pedestrian survey. When you are when you're taking notes, as everybody should be taking notes every day, the soils, you have to be able to describe them in terms of the sand, what the composition of it is. And if there's sand in it, what percentage of the sand is it? What size is the sand? I mean, I remember reading site records where somebody said it's a fist-sized cobble. Well, my fist is not the same as Alex's fist. Like, you need
Did I
to
write that?
No. But we need to have students who are coming out learning about basic geology, because everything that we're doing is in the dirt. So we need to have people talking about it in a way that someone who has no idea, has never been to this location, can read it and go, oh, I see what you saw. So it's partly the Montse, whoever mentioned the Montse, it's the composition of the soil, the percentages of the composition, and the other things that are around it, including the plants, the trees, and the critters, because those are all important pieces of what it is that we're looking at. So get your mammal and bird books, your tree books, your shrub books, and soils.
I think another thing that would be useful for students would be just whatever's available, looking at just case studies, success stories, CRM projects, I don't know what the availability is in terms of, the confidentiality for most of them, but there are plenty that are, publicly available, maybe redacted for sensitive information, just to kind of get a sense of that process from start to end. And the other thing I would add too is just also looking at Native American consultation, which people have kind of touched on, but that's a huge part of the job too. Is you can expect that 9 times out of 10, there will be a Native American representative on site when you're working on any CRM project. And I think really discussing how to effectively collaborate with a tribal monitor, maybe it's the tribal historic preservation officer who's out there, you just never know. And just knowing how to be respectful, how to know what you're allowed to say to whom, and really communicating with those communities and being culturally sensitive would be a huge thing to highlight.
One final quick thing, would be great if you can recognize human bone versus animal bone, because if you're monitoring, find some bones, you're gonna wanna know, like, is this human remains we're dealing with or something else? So basic familiarity, or at least know who to call to, like photos to be like, this is one.
Quick pitch, the SCA is I'm teaching an osteology workshop that is designed to teach you the difference between human and non-human remains in an archeological setting.
That's
On
next
Friday.
Friday, right?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay.
Mhm.
I've taken it, it's a great workshop.
Okay, I want to turn it over to my colleagues here. Wow, this has grown. You're a hit. Okay, so do folks in the room have any questions? Yes, please.
Does it help to have a background in California, geology and geography?
Yes.
I want to answer more broadly, and kind of back to your question, what can we teach? Archaeology is this crazy vast subject that touches on everything. And so we need subject matter experts in virtually everything. So if you have something that you have knowledge of, it will relate to archaeology.
And we don't expect that anyone will know all of these things that we just mentioned.
Totally.
Because that would be ridiculous, but to at least, have some high level knowledge of, all of those things, and then specific knowledge of something would be great.
Knowing what you need to know, basically.
Yeah.
It's like,
Stuff I've learned.
yeah.
And specifically on the geology side, it's super helpful because we have this, very young geology with a lot of buried sites and a lot of, unique aspects compared to the eastern states. So yeah, absolutely.
And if you're interested in geology, there is a niche within archaeology called geoarchaeology. And it is a growing need for all of the work that we do. And we really need more geoarchaeologists. So if you love dirt and you love archaeology, there's a spot for you.
Right, and I feel like that's a key point. There's a lot of related disciplines, like, and like, I think I made a point earlier about GIS, there's certain kind of fields of study, that kind of have a close relationship with archaeology that if you're interested in could be a huge benefit to your potential career. Like right now, we recently lost our person that was a specialist in GIS, and we're looking to replace that person. And so if you're great with computers, you're great with, spatial data, and you have, some of those skill sets, then you could be like a great asset, even if like digging holes in the ground wasn't your jam. Like you can be an archaeologist and work in the archaeology field without slugging it out in the trenches. There are other career paths besides, doing pedestrian surveys and digging shovel pits. There's a wide range of things you could do.
And I don't know if you guys have ever heard about it's a gender-based analysis about people applying for jobs. There's a list of 10 things that this job applicant needs. And typically men would go, I got 4. And women would say, oh, I only have 8. I'm not qualified. So broaden that to archaeologists. If there's a list of 10 things and you can only do 4 of them, don't give up. Don't be like, oh man, I don't have, the other 6. Just keep trying. You'll learn the others along the way.
Yes, please.
I remember from last year's panel, there was talk about how there's a lot of need for new archaeologists with like the Build Back Better stuff that was going on. There was a lot of increase in jobs. Just wondering how, or if that's changed, like there was like layoffs with some of the federal archaeologists and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering if they're coming into the consulting industry, and if it's like, if there's been a change within the past 12 months.
We're still figuring that out. It's unfolding as we speak.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna say that, like from a high level perspective, I think those of us in the private sector, especially in California, are a little bit insulated from the initial waves of the new administration slash and burn policy. You know, we have CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that drives a lot of the work we do. And, you know, we also do stuff that's triggered by federal legislation. But that, you know, isn't the only thing. I think we do more CEQA work in general than we do, you know, federal work. I mean, it varies by company. But I think, yeah, those, if you were looking for a job for a government agency, now is not the time to apply to a government agency.
But the people who are getting cut loose from the federal agencies
Yeah.
aren't gonna be filling
Well,
the jobs you guys are looking for.
Yeah, well, and then I think maybe the bigger question is, what is the administration gonna do that could affect? And so I think, so basically, the federal government has control over administering federal laws relating to cultural resources, the National Historic Preservation Act, et cetera, et cetera. And they also have the power of the purse over federally funded projects. So they're probably not going to try to eliminate federal laws because that's hard. What they're going to do is nibble away at the edges of it. They're going to cut funding, federal funding to projects, which means fewer projects are going to happen that thus need archaeology. And they're going to start poking away at the regulations by which federal laws are enacted in practice. They're going to find ways to have, you know, fewer projects that require federal regulations. You know, there's, as a small woman-owned company, many federal contracts have small business set-asides. That is a certain proportion of the contract that needs to go to either a small business or a so-called disadvantaged business, a business owned by women or visible minorities. And as one of those companies, the federal government, in their slashing and burning of diversity initiatives, could cut all of those small business set-asides. And so small businesses, you know, like many of ours, could suffer in that way, which is kind of, you know, disturbing and troubling. So they could cut funding, but they could also reduce the types and numbers of projects that are subject to federal review. So that's how it can kind of affect us.
The Caltrans acts as the federal agency in the state of California, so they act for the Federal Highways Administration. So they're both a state and a federal agency. And they get federal money to do projects, so that's the part of the Build Back Better. But what we also have in California is SB1, and there is no sunset on that. So that's forever going to be an investment of, and it's like monopoly money. It's like $50 billion annually, or million, I don't know, M or B, doesn't really matter. It's a huge amount of money that gets put into California infrastructure because almost all of our culverts and bridges are failing. And so we need to have them replaced. You know, they're 50 years old, all of them. They are technically historical. So we're still gonna have California projects because we have CEQA and because we have SB1, but the Build Back Better money could get pulled back, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and we work in a lot of small private development, and that's booming in this area. I mean, especially in the Santa Clara Valley, like they cannot build stuff fast enough, like replacing all the Jack in the Boxes with the, you know, 6-story apartment buildings. You know, every fast food joint on El Camino Real from San Jose to, you know, South City is like, you know, under consideration for redevelopment. So there's a ton of work like that.
But it'll be interesting to see how the administration tries to claw back on how federal regulations, you know, how the process works. You know, for example, I heard something that the Secretary of the Interior had reached out to staff of the Department of the Interior, which administers federal lands, saying, can you please review your Section 106 process and get back to us on how you could streamline it to facilitate oil and gas exploration on federal lands? And so what that is, that's code for, can you cut this streamline this process by cutting some of the steps to make it quicker and easier. So the administration is prodding into the process by which the National Historic Preservation Act and other laws are being enacted. Because if you can gut those processes, you know, saying this needs to be done in 6 weeks rather than 6 months, then we're going to have to cut corners in how we do the work. And so they can nibble away at some of these, because there are ambiguities in the regulations that describe how the laws need to be implemented. And if they can poke away at the sensitive points of those ambiguities, they can start eliminating key parts of the archaeological process so that it doesn't need to be done anymore, and they can drill for oil and gas quicker.
But there's the
I was
judiciary.
gonna say maybe, because then they're gonna find out that that was only one component of this huge blob of bureaucracy. And
Yeah.
then somewhere in there, they had to have some kind of check, right?
Tribal concerns or
Try to
whatever,
speed it up,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The Sierra-
So it's not all doom and gloom, there are checks and balances that hopefully will kick in.
Well,
There
what'll
are.
happen is they'll send the emails, they'll get bounced back because they just fired the person that was supposed to answer that. Weeks to hire someone because there's a hiring freeze, that's what's gonna happen.
But there is the judiciary, so there are gonna be lawsuits. If they try to nibble away at the regulation, at the regulatory compliance, there will be lawsuits that are brought. Sierra Club just brought a lawsuit this week. And it's gonna have to go through the judicial system, and there are a lot of lower courts that are gonna see this, and it takes a long time for if it doesn't get decided to get to the Supreme Court. And until things are decided, they're not gonna completely change. So change is slow, and there's activism. So there are reasons to think that, yes, we are looking at a lot of potential shifts. Doesn't mean it's gonna happen immediately, and does it happen permanently? Not necessarily.
I want to give students a chance to know if there was one that had a hand up.
No, I didn't see.
If not, so I'm Albert Gonzalez. I teach at Cal State East Bay, and there's a couple of you I don't know, but so I'm wondering about the future of archaeology and AI. I have, in particular, the biggest complaint I've gotten from CRM folks about my former students going in somewhere between tech and full time is the writing component. And the question is why am I teaching them to write? Because you have been teaching them to write, right? And that's a problem across the CSU system, and it's increasingly a problem across all colleges, and that students just aren't reading. I read 4 times as much as I assigned my students when I was in college, right? That's all sort of changing. But AI, I'll give you an example. I offer an assignment that it's a CRM report, a mock CRM report that I ask students to do about 10 to 15 pages, something like that. I fed my AI, which isn't anything special. I pay $20 a month for it. I fed it all the documents it needed, asked it not to hit the web, just use the documents that I gave it, including an Excel database that was simple, but not real simple. And it did a C+ job. And a student who's had, say, a lot of exposure to reading archaeological reports, right? And has some sense for theory and some sense for what CRM does, can turn that into an A+ report for us, it's sort of mock report level. So my question for you is, how do you anticipate this writing kind of necessity requirement change in the next, by the time many of these folks go from, tech to full time, they will be using AI. AI will be assisting them. So maybe the writing need, I don't know, I don't want to answer the question for you. I want to know what you think about writing in the future.
I love the AI question, because this chat GPT thing is like my go-to subject when I'm drinking with friends and I want to get into it. So I'm using it professionally already. And we're at this moment with this technology, it's a uncharted waters. I mean, what is ethical? What's plagiarism? How do we use this? How do we make sure it's factual? The way I'm using it is similar to Grammarly. Okay, so I'll compose a table of contents of what I want to convey in a message or writing, right? I'm gonna hit these subjects, and then I'll say rephrase and expand. And then we're having this writer's workshop going back and forth, and it can really get you close. The problem I see with AI is unless you're really on your game, it will introduce subtle changes that change the meaning, and now it's not factual.
Yeah.
So AI is limited to the competency of the editor. Okay, that means that you can't have it create stuff for you. It can help you convey complex thoughts in a logical manner, a logical linear manner, so it's comprehensible to someone else. And what it does, it takes what would take me a tremendous amount of time to make a very well-written summary. I can do that pretty fast with AI, right? And I'm not publishing this stuff. It's like, these are, generally I'm using it for emails where there's a complicated email. I need to like, it's got a schedule, it's got all these tasks, all these things. And then like, I'll craft a nice email and I send it off after I've vetted it. I think AI is going to be part of everybody's thing. And we're navigating that space of what's ethics and how do you actually use it safely. But yeah, it's coming.
I would just add that, yeah, I think it's inevitable. It's a great tool, but it lies. Like I had a conversation with DeepSeek the other day where I'm like, hey, do you have some academic references on this subject or something related to historical architecture? Gave me some references. I tried to find the articles and it turns out they were just totally made up. Yeah. I was like, hey, DeepSeek, did you just make those up? Oh yeah, I made those up because I don't really know much about that. It's like, like they don't lie to you, but they will straight up lie to you and make stuff up. And it, you know, and for like a paper, if the prompt is not like actually checking references, you could get by with that BS. But you know, it requires a human touch because ultimately what we're producing, we're producing documents that have to be legally defensible. So if the project gets sued, you have to be like, I am an expert human and I have produced expert human text. And this is the basis of our legal argument for why you're in compliance with the law. That's so without that like ability to edit. And it's hard to be a really good editor unless you also write, in my experience.
Correct.
I think GPT, my God, forget it, you know what I mean? Is a good starting point. But you do have to have exactly what you guys are talking about. And I do think it's everywhere already. So, you know, the ship has sailed. We're all going to be dealing with it. But we do have clients who have specific clauses in their contracts that say you will not use AI. And if we are found to have used AI, we will not be in compliance with our contract. And they will take back the money.
Yeah, Caltrans is an example. I think I signed something recently.
Yeah.
Where we had in a proposal.
Yeah. Ironically, they also submitted an RFP looking for AI. So I was like, which way do you want it, Caltrans?
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things about those. Many of the cheap ones are generative AI, so everything you feed it, like it is good at taking your notes and a bunch of reports and then steaming it into something that you can then build with. But it is learning as you put in archaeology reports. So as you put data into it, it is learning using the state's data, your data. You all live and are supposed to protect these sites, right? You're feeding it to the machine. And so whether you're paying to keep that just your own thing, or whether it's going into the open seas with everyone else, like,
Yeah.
it's difficult to know.
That's something I go back and forth on in terms of, like, I've thought about this a lot we do a lot of mapping now, on iPads. And, you know, it's gotten to a good point where Esri is a pretty dependable company, but it is proprietary. And I think about having these proprietary applications where we're feeding all the sensitive data in there. Proprietary, you know, say Esri goes bankrupt, you know, or whatever. I think there was some app years ago called like Feathernote or something like that, but you know, you're paying a subscription and you're relying upon this other private entity to still exist without, and I mean, there's ways around that, obviously, with like really, you know, detailed data management and like fine tuning that. But, you know, if you lose that information or it leaks, and then the other part of it is that kind of knowledge loss that I see myself in the field, especially with younger, like, you know, just starting out people. We have these iPads, we can do the work faster, so let's just do it that way. But then say the iPad dies and we have to map things by hand, you know, there's like that, and that's just kind of metaphorical for what you're talking about with AI, but that kind of loss of just like the hard and fast skill of being able to do pen to paper kind of thought, I think that could put us in a pretty sticky situation potentially. So yeah, I see the pros and cons and I can't really arrive at a decision about it necessarily, but.
Well, and then, yeah, reckoning with confidential information and how does that all, the ethics of it all, yeah.
Do you guys all know that archaeological sites are confidential, and as archaeologists, you are required to keep them confidential? Because I didn't know that when I graduated from UC Berkeley, and it's, you know, it's like. That was a long time ago. Just a long time ago. But it's like, you know, it's like, this is cool stuff. You didn't want to share it, but you know, you can't do that.
You've got a question in that.
Jesus, I teach here. I would have taught you that, I promise. I just want to say, first off, I know I came late to the game here, but I can't be grateful enough to have the real practitioners of archaeology come and be this incredible resource for our students and for us. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And I know you guys are dedicated. Last time I was in private sector, it was aerospace engineering. So what do I know about the kind of, close margins you guys have to be cutting? But to that end, like my colleague, Dr. White, does a lot of partnership with, like state and regional entities to get our students the training they need. My students tend to get more hired into tribal historic preservation offices and historic preservation divisions, right? But that's because we do these things where the students are learning the real deal with those practitioners, and then we are doing, some back end work, right? So like in the room, I can see people here who are spectacular practitioners of magnetic radiometry or ground penetrating radar, GIS, and things like that, where our job is to kind of help them hone those toolkits. But do you guys see any bandwidth for an apprenticeship model where, like, for example, I have a whole team of students going to work on tribal territory doing some ground geophysics, but they want that so they're not literally dancing on ancestors' bones, right? But they also want to get the CEQA clearance thing so that they get the land back from this NGO that's bought it all up and is handing it back to them, right? So to do that work, I'm not their huckleberry for that. I can do all the geophysics they want and get them cleared up and make sure that that's it. And the students can do a good job of that. But what I was thinking is that, like, what if that same team of radical GPR, SWAT team goes out and does work on one of your sites because you need it, right? But then you shepherd them through the process of how, like, what these CEQA, paperwork look like. And then they come back working for the tribe and do their GPR work for the tribe, and then bring what they've learned from you there, right? So they bring something from us to you, and then vice versa back into these tribal partnerships. Do you see, is there any wiggle room for that in your schedules?
Yeah, I am also quite interested in like collaborations with CRM companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all love the idea, but it's also complicated, giving our time and budgetary constraints and regulatory, limitations. There's liability issues with non-employees on sites, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it too. And I'm not sure I've got a quick and easy answer for how you make that work.
Well, one of the things that we've tried to do with Caltrans contract that we have is to bring on, we brought Chico State on and Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt, as sub-consultants, because they do have that ability to, they run their own projects, and so it's complicated though. So the idea was, the partnership agreement was, we wanted to have access to their students because they want their students to get real life experience. And we need to have broadened our tech pool, and we want to know that they're coming from a certain place, that they're going to be held accountable by their institution and also by us as the prime consultant. And so that's what those marriages were made with the idea of some of the universities' foundations that fund them make it so painful to work with them that the invoicing process costs us more money than it does make it beneficial to have that kind of a sub-consultant relationship. And if it's not, if they're not an employee or a sub-consultant, you do run into insurance issues. You can't have somebody who's not an employee or a sub-consultant in some fashion be on your project. It's an insurance liability. But there are ways that you can team if you have a project and you're going to need GPR, and we know that Judith Surrey students have this capability. I mean, it's something that we could either figure out ways to hire them as employees, renting your technology. You can build that into a budget for sure, and then they are a part of the project. You just figure out what the details are, but it just takes planning. You can definitely do that.
Well, and
Pay for them. It's more than I want that they would have that experience to offer you to bring some value to what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then somehow when they're doing the work for the tribe, for doing those steps of CEQA that I don't track like you guys do, right? Then that information, that ability comes back to that other partnership, kind of like a labor exchange, right? Like, I'll help you move into your apartment, you help me move your, you know what I mean? Like something like that, rather than a pure dollar, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
I can bring up an example where I'm sorry.
It's okay, we're both at the same time.
We did a project in St. Helena last year, incredible archaeological site. And we partnered with UC Davis, and we wrote a small budget to support students analyzing all the faunal remains and botanical from the site, right? And so we funneled CRM money into the university. The university had hands-on training, which they managed in their lab. And I just got the report last week, which is fantastic because it's late, which I knew was going to happen. Yeah, that's part of that thing. But yeah, I mean, that's one way we're engaging across academic and CRM and trying to connect with you guys. And also, I'm a big fan of collaborative projects. There's so much subject matter experts out there. And if we all contribute just a little bit, we can make these amazing products. And one thing about CRM, and I know we share this ethic, is there's a lot of money involved in these projects. And if you can get with comparable, like if you got a grant for $250,000 to do a study, that's a big grant. CRM people are blowing through that left and right, okay? So there's a chance to do really good archaeology with that money, because if you could do the minimum compliance piece, whatever you save can be above the bar. That's when you're publishing your article in a peer-reviewed journal, right? And so we're also trying to do it that way, right? Create excellent archaeology with the opportunity, with the money that we're getting for this stuff. And so we end up tapping UC Davis, or we'll tap some other folks that are subject matter experts, and we'll all contribute to this larger edited volume, and then it becomes meaningful, you know?
Yeah, well, and one thing that I know the president of Albion, Sarah Pilo, taught the UCSC Field School for 2 summers, and she organized it as kind of a CRM type project in terms of how they did the field work. It was at the Castro Adobe in Watsonville, and it so that's kind of a way, to kind of have more of that interchange where it's a CRM professional who's designing the field work. Now, of course, as a full-time, a president of a company, a parent, and trying to do, that's not sustainable over the long term. That's you do it out of love and you put in a bunch of your own time. But so that that's maybe one, kind of another kind of option.
That one also won the Society for Historical Archaeology's Field School Award that year, and it was a partnership with Santa Cruz.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I'd be super open to having partnerships with academic people who have those specialties. Our workflow is really unpredictable, and our needs are really unpredictable. So I think what would help me is if there was somewhere I could go and be like, hey, UC Berkeley has these specialties to offer. Well, when a project comes up where that is a relevant need, then we can reach out. But it's especially as a really small business like we are, we have 6 staff, we don't, our what we're doing is going to be different year to year, and we don't have a way of predicting whether we will need a geophysics person or whatever. Projects come up that need specialties, but it's unpredictable. So.
But I think getting back to what you're asking though about how do we give back to the tribal community and that reciprocal sharing of information. I mean, I think that's pretty tricky, but we just did an osteology workshop that was part of a larger week-long workshop that the Wiyot Rancheria organized, and it was 4 different tribes that came together. It was Blue Lake, Wiyot, Bear River, and Trinidad. And they learned all kinds of different things. I was only there for, Jose and I were there for a day to do the workshop and then a day to do a field visit, trying to recover the location of a massacre burial. And that is one way that we can, we didn't make any money on that, but we did have to pay for our time. And so that is one way that we try to collaborate with sharing back information, because we're training cultural monitors, we're training tribal monitors. So it's not exactly like the quid pro quo, but it is an effort because they are our partners, they're our colleagues and our partners in all of the work that we do. And so it's really important that we develop those relationships and share our knowledge as they share their knowledge with us too, in terms of our ability to interpret what it is that we're looking at, or maybe think about things differently that we wouldn't have thought of if we hadn't had that conversation.
So Dr. Gonzalez, you have one more question, but we have a reception waiting for us, so one more question, please.
Sure, just kind of building on these other questions and comments. So these collaborative partnerships are really time consuming for everybody. It's so unpredictable in your field. It's hard to plan these things in advance, and when programs do come, they don't last very long. I wonder how you feel about, and Bill and I have talked about this, I think, a million times, about going from a collaboration model to a relationship to a sponsorship model. So there are courses that you want us to teach, right? And those classes don't make, there's never enough students to justify their cost. But they can be sponsored. If enough firms got together and got X amount of dollars together, then they could cover the seats for that class, at least at the CSU. That's a doable thing through the foundation. And that's, it feels more expensive, right? Because it's a lump sum, right? But I doubt that these collaborative projects in the past haven't cost,
Yeah.
but I'll.
What, is there room for us to donate our time too, to like come and like give a guest lecture in a class like that, or?
I mean, there's always
I don't
that.
know,
yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I'm just trying to think about,
Always that.
like to share, some of our experience directly with students in a way that's less complicated than, I don't know.
Well, but I mean, I feel like if you think back on the universities that have been most helpful, most willing, maybe folks pooling money to make like a endowment for a professor of practice that's just gonna teach that class, right? And it could even be someone who works for a CRM company that meets the qualifications that teaches at that university. And then the anthropology department in exchange gets to advertise the scores, and the students get to learn right from a cultural resources person, right?
Yeah, because I feel like between all of us, we have mountains of like raw data and stuff we could bring in and that people can actually get their hands on and play with,
Yeah, for sure. I would not hesitate to come visit a class. I would collaborate with you guys to do an osteology workshop. And we would underwrite the cost of doing that because I think it's a really important thing. And I've developed a great comparative collection over a couple decades. And so, those are ways that we can easily give, but funding a class would mean us as not just us here, but us and our colleagues and our other companies. And we do a lot of work for environmental engineer or large engineering firms that do environmental compliance, and they hardly want to pay us, let alone getting them to underwrite like a class. I mean, I think that's something you could build towards. I think that's a goal that is a good goal to set, but in the short term, doing, push in teaching opportunities.
Well, and it's in a certain sense disappointing that there's not a representative from one of the big corporate firms here that, they have deeper pockets than some of us.
Well, they are, but they're at the business school, they're not here. There's plenty of those guys all over. Monsanto, they're all here, don't worry. They're just not in the swing.
Yeah.
All right, well, I've appreciated my time here. I want to make sure that folks have time for the reception here. Thank you very much.